Who steals a goddamn boy? I'm gonna let fly at those sons of bitches! Don, I need you to stay calm. Get down here now! You inbred trash!
Bad boys, what you gonna do? What you gonna do when they come for you? Bad boys, what you gonna do? What you gonna do when they come for you?
This story took place approximately 8 years ago. I'm going to change the names for anonymity, and this is also a burner account and will be the only post that I send to you under this account. You see, I was with my girlfriend, we'll call her Casey, for 4 years at the time of the story. We both loved the outdoors, from hiking, fishing, picnics, you name it. We loved taking a drive to a random park and just exploring. One Saturday morning, we decided to take a hike. It was a decent drive for us, so I brought our camping gear just in case we decided to camp or sleep in the car instead of driving home. Also, depending on the weather, we might just suck it up and drive home because neither of us wanted to sleep in the rain, even if it was in the car. The hike started out peaceful and enjoyable, with the melody of the running water, the birds, bugs, and other woodland animals. It's what drew us outdoors in the first place, that escape from the hustle and bustle of everyday life. It was an escape for both of us to have peace of mind and clear our heads. We usually spent most of the time talking about our future and what we wanted, a wedding, what type of neighborhood we wanted to live in, the house, and all the other things that go on in the next chapter of life. We would go on about our dream scenarios, such as where we want to establish a hometown, but also somewhere to go and escape the winters, and how not having kids would hopefully free us up financially to accomplish that someday. It's hard to explain, but I felt like we had our best conversations when we were hiking. Now, as we sunk deeper into the woods, I got a weird feeling of paranoia. I felt like the peaceful sounds that surrounded us had changed somehow. The animals had a different tune or vibration, and the water that had passed up a long time ago turned into sounds that resembled whispers. And I felt like I was being followed and that someone was trying to get my attention at the same time. I quickly snapped out of it and went on with whatever conversation we were having at the time. I started getting tired and asked if we could take a break. I was surprised that I needed a break and figured that I just didn't have enough water that day, being dehydrated. After the break, I noticed a shift in Casey's mood and mannerisms. She seems way more quiet than usual and grumpy. I brushed it off and assumed that she was probably just tired as well, and I tried to continue a positive topic of conversation to cheer her up. Not long after she turned grumpy, she then turned into an outright jerk. Every comment I make is met with a rude or sarcastic comment, which at first made me think that she was kidding, but I quickly learned that she wasn't. I asked her if she wanted to turn around or take a break or just continue quietly, anything to try and get a gauge of how I could make this situation better. But then we hit a very silent phase. She wouldn't communicate with me at all. I started trying to recall if I did or said anything that would have made her upset, but I honestly couldn't think of anything. Then as we get about as deep as we wanted to go on our hike, Casey has an absolute manic breakdown and begins screaming and crying at the same time. As I try to approach her to ask what's going on, she becomes violent, starts flailing her arms, one of which actually makes direct contact with my temple and knocks my glasses off. Now, I'm pretty much legally blind without my glasses, so needless to say that I need to quickly find them or I can't see anything. I also want to mention here that this is completely out of character for Casey. She wasn't that type of erratic person. I'm panicking on the ground trying to find my glasses like Velma while Casey is still flailing her arms and now running and screaming in the opposite direction. Thankfully, I quickly find my glasses and get up and chase after her. I catch up to her and she seems completely out of it. Her eyes don't seem glazed over, but they seem different. Like she's there, but she isn't there. I know that may sound weird, but that's the best way I can explain it. At this point, she has stopped screaming and acting violently towards me. I sat her down and made her drink some water. She still isn't talking much, but seems a little more settled down. Once I determine that she can walk, we start making our way down the trail back to the car. It seems as though the more we move and the further we get from her manic breakdown, the more back to normal she gets. She's now starting to talk to me and asks if she remembers what happened. She's telling me that she has no recollection and becomes embarrassed and apologetic for her episode. As we get about half a mile from the car, she seems completely back to normal. I'm still struggling to rationalize what happened. I have never, ever seen her act like that in the 4 years we have been together at that point, and we have been through happy times and also the most sad and stressful times of our lives. She was a big believer in the supernatural, so she was convinced that something dark had taken over her body. I didn't buy that, though. I knew that there had to be some kind of rational explanation. I did some research and found out that in those woods, there are actually some plants that can really mess you up. I'm thinking that she must have just come in contact with something, somehow, and maybe that's what caused the episode. Some of these plants can actually cause mania, fever, and even hallucinations, and it got me thinking, maybe I came into contact with them as well, and that's what made me feel anxious earlier that day. And without having an answer to that question, I've just chosen the simple solution, and that's to simply never hike there again. Has anyone else ever experienced something similar? And would you mind sharing your thoughts if you have? Some of my fondest memories as a child are my mother taking me to Girl Scouts. It's funny how certain things stick out over others. I don't remember the cookies, but I remember my mom putting the badges on my uniform. I'm not sure if specific things stick in my memories more than others because I lost my mother, and this was one of the main activities we did together, or if it was my passion and eagerness for learning as a young girl. Either way, the Girl Scouts has always been a big part of my life. Into adulthood, I have been a consistent volunteer, even though I have not yet been blessed with children of my own to share these experiences with. The story I'm sharing with you all today is one that I haven't ever put down on paper, and so please bear with me while I do my best to tell you it. It was one of the annual camping trips for the troop where we would have food, activities, hiking, and a number of other things to keep the girls occupied. I always helped with food and some of the arts and craft type of activities. I would use my own money to purchase snacks and approved food items and try to research something fun for the kids to do if they didn't want to participate in some of the more woodsy options. When I was younger, I always felt out of place and would have preferred something more art-centric to make me feel more comfortable and ease into the trip. This trip started just like any other. The leaders of the excursion were mostly comprised of mothers of the children and other volunteers like myself. One of the first things we did with the morning daylight was a hike. We always started off these trips with a hike, and one, because the kids were super excited, and this would allow them to see their surroundings, and two, we knew that it would most likely make them tired for later, which would hopefully amount to a good night's sleep. The start of this hike was no different from any of the others. It was standard and safe, which is exactly what you would want for a trip like this. There was buzzing from the children's excitement, but suddenly I felt everything go really quiet. I felt like my sinuses and ears were plugged and all I could hear was buzzing. After a few seconds, I came to and looked around to take an inventory of the girls, and that's when I noticed that Cindy was missing. I walked briskly to the line of children looking for Cindy, but don't see her anywhere. Trying not to cause too much panic or concern, I start calling her name and walking even further forward to see if she had wandered up with another group. I bumped into one of the mothers and asked if she had seen Cindy. She must have seen the fear in my eyes because as she said no, she immediately walked back with me and began calling Cindy's name. It had been a few minutes now and we had alerted everyone walking to stay still as we did an inventory to find Cindy and see if anyone else was missing. I estimate about 5 minutes had elapsed and real, genuine terror was beginning to set in. We were considering contacting the authorities to say that a child was missing. And just as we were getting ready to call, we found Cindy, nonchalantly walking a little bit off the trail in the woods. I ran over to her to see if she was okay, and she seemed completely fine. I took inventory of her and she looked okay and didn't seem scared, startled, or even a bit out of place. I held her hand and a few people yelled to all the girls to stay in a single file line and not wander off as we proceeded back to camp. Now Cindy was normally the shy, quiet type. She was humming and making a lot of conversation with me, which was completely out of character for her. I playfully asked her what put her in such a good mood and she said, "The friend I made in the woods. They warned me about the man in that red cave." I paused. Really confused, I asked, "What do you mean? Who did you meet in the woods? Did anyone touch you? Did they hurt you?" She just kept looking at me with this really strange smile, saying that she had made a new friend and that they were nice and wouldn't hurt her. Everything always went back to staying away from that man in the red cave. At this point, I was getting goosebumps, prickles on my neck. I don't remember what else I asked or her exact responses. I was just making sure that she was okay and hadn't really encountered someone in the woods that would put her or others in danger. I started to think to myself, had she really seen something, or was her imagination just running wild with the intrigue of the limitless woods around us? I had trouble getting comfortable that night, falling in and out of restless sleep thinking about some man in a red cave. Nothing of further incident happened that weekend, thankfully, and everyone went home safe and happy. I had eventually put the experience deep out of my mind to where it had been years since I had thought about it, and that was until we returned to that same forest to do another camping retreat. Initially, I didn't remember until a night when I was sitting outside again having trouble sleeping, and I saw a little girl getting up. I asked if she was okay and if she needed to go to the bathroom or needed help with anything. She said she was fine and was just having trouble sleeping. I told her that I too had trouble sleeping and sometimes it's difficult to get rest when we aren't at home in our own beds. She said that that wasn't the problem. She said she was having bad dreams. She said her friend kept waking her up to tell her that she needed to go see the man in the red cave. And my heart sank. I actually temporarily lost hearing in that moment, and I asked her, "Who was the friend asking you to go to the red cave?" And she couldn't articulate, so it was hard to discern if it was someone in the tent waking her up and telling her, or if she was really just having a bad dream. But hearing about the man in the red cave again, after all these years, that couldn't have been coincidence. I put the girl to bed and told her to let me know if she was woken up again. I didn't hear from her for the rest of the night. I also didn't sleep at all that night, not even 5 minutes. I went home the next day and I have never returned to that spot again. Back in 2015, my wife and I, along with our friends Jake and Tabby, had been planning this hike trip for many weeks. We all worked together and it was rare for us to get a long weekend off at the same time, given that we all have such drastically different jobs. So when the opportunity finally came, we jumped at it, and the plan was to head out early Saturday morning and spend the entire day exploring the wilderness. We'd mapped out a trail that promised stunning views, and we were all eager to disconnect from the world for a while. The drive to the trailhead was peaceful. The sun was just starting to rise, so the entire drive had this very amazing orange color, and we were laughing, swapping stories, and enjoying the early start. But as soon as we arrived at the trailhead, our excitement took a hit. The sky darkened almost instantly, and within minutes, it started to downpour. It was raining so hard that you couldn't even see anything in front of you. We hoped it was just a passing shower and decided to wait it out in the car. We'd already made the drive there. We weren't about to turn around and drive home already. The rain pounded against the roof and the windows fogged up with our breath. It wasn't the start that we'd imagined, but we were determined to make the best of it. And after about 20 minutes, the rain let up, leaving behind a very misty and overcast day. We debated whether that we should continue the hike, but the trail was calling us and we didn't want to waste any time. So we grabbed our gear and headed out. We didn't get very far before the rain started again, this time even harder. It was like someone had turned on a faucet and we were drenched within seconds. We ran back to the car, laughing and cursing at the same time, trying to shield ourselves from the downpour. But as we reached the car, we saw something that made us all stop in our tracks. Standing next to the SUV was a young woman. She was soaked to the bone, and her clothes clinging to her thin frame were like rags. She looked like she had been through hell, and her hair was matted and her face was covered with seemingly dirt. And at first I thought maybe I was seeing things because of the rain, but no. She was definitely real and standing directly next to my car. Even more creepy was that she appeared to be looking into the windows. Now, without even thinking, I shouted something out like, "Hey, get away from my car!" That was more out of fear than anything else. It was instinctive, and I just felt like I had this rush of adrenaline that was telling me something wasn't quite right. She didn't move, though. She stood there, staring at us with these very hollow eyes. She had that look like a deer gives you in the middle of the woods when they're just sort of standing there like statues. Before I could let out another angry scream, my wife held me back and said to me in a very concerned voice to wait and hold on. She even said that she looked kind of hurt. Now, Jake and Tabby were silent, unsure of what to do. I didn't want to let this stranger into our car, but I couldn't ignore the fact that she might be in serious trouble. And so, against my better judgment, we all piled into the SUV, with a woman sitting behind the front passenger seat and my wife in the middle seat in the back trying to comfort this woman. The car was cramped, the windows fogged up again from the sudden influx of bodies, and you could just feel the tension in the car. It went from a fun hiking trip to now dealing with a strange and potentially hurt woman in the middle of nowhere. The woman didn't say much. In fact, she didn't say anything at all, and she just sat there, shivering and staring straight ahead. My wife thought that she looked like she was maybe in shock, and she started to assume the worst. The woman had makeup running all down her cheeks, and was impossible to tell if that was from the rain or crying, and we tried to ask her where she was from and what had happened to her, but she didn't respond. I kept glancing at her in the rearview mirror, trying to read her expressions, but there was nothing there, just this sort of vacant look. The lights were on, but clearly nobody was home. Jake suggested that we should get her to the nearest gas station and call for help, and we all agreed. There was no cell service out here, so that was our best option. I started the car and we headed down this muddy road. The windshield wipers were working overtime to keep the rain at bay. Now, I know it's easy to say this now, but something just still wasn't sitting right with me. I know this was a tense situation, but that's not what bothered me. The way she just sort of appeared out of nowhere, her silence, with the way she didn't seem to be fazed by the cold or the rain, that's what bothered me. It was clear to me that this woman had issues, and it was impossible to tell if she was dangerous or just truly shaken up about something. I could tell my wife and friends were trying to stay calm, but I could feel the discomfort they all felt, especially Tabby. We were about 2 minutes from the gas station when the woman suddenly started to scream. And not just a little scream, but it was a loud, high-pitched, guttural sound that startled me so badly that I started to lose control of the car. She thrashed around in the back seat, hitting the windows and the seats, making it impossible for me to regain control of the vehicle. I tried my best to at least keep the SUV on the road, but the road was slick, and before I knew it, the car veered off the road and into a ditch. The car now having come to a sudden stop, and for a moment, everything was silent except for the pounding of the rain. We were all trying to catch our breath, trying to make sense of what just happened. But then the woman just starts cackling. It was this cold, empty laugh that was kind of bringing us back to reality. She was howling in laughter. I had a minor scrape on my forehead from hitting my head on the steering wheel, but everyone else appeared to be physically okay. And before anyone else could say anything, Jake just shouted at her, "What the hell is wrong with you?" And this woman's insane laughter came to some abrupt end. She pulled out a small blade from the inside of her shirt. It looked like a box cutter from where I was sitting. She put her left elbow into my wife's neck and then held the blade with her right hand to Tabby's neck. She said, "Give me all your money now." It was one of the most unsettling parts about this nightmare that was unfolding. It was that there was no trace of fear in her voice, only a sick sort of satisfaction. And we didn't argue. We just threw down whatever cash or whatever else we had, as we were all too scared to do anything else. My wife started crying. Jake was cursing under his breath, and I was just trying to keep it together for everyone. The woman grabbed the money, opened the car door, and just started sprinting into the rain without looking back. We sat there in silence with only the back seat door open, and after a few seconds I started the car again, and my wife closed the door, and we drove the rest of the way to the gas station. We reported this incident, but by then, obviously, this crazy woman was long gone. The police took our statements, but it was clear that they didn't expect to find her. To this day, I have no idea who that woman was or where she came from. I thought maybe she was a meth addict or something, and I remember for a while after that I was looking up crimes in the area, but I never found anything that even remotely fit that description. All I know is that we were lucky to get out of that situation alive. This was one of the worst experiences of my life, and even though I was happy to get out physically unharmed, I still think about it, and it makes me sick knowing that somewhere out there, that wild woman is most likely terrorizing someone else. My now ex-boyfriend, current boyfriend during the story, who I'll just call Roger, and I tried to travel and take trips as much as possible. We loved exploring new places and getting away, even if it was for just a few days. And now with that said, we are pretty big introverts and like doing our own thing. When we hike or camp, we like to do so in secluded areas and not be in crowded camping sites or trails where you are literally shoulder to shoulder with other people. We decided to visit a new hiking trail that was decently steep that Roger heard about from a friend at work. We figured it would test our limits and be a nice little getaway for a few days. We have a huge tent and some other amenities to make ourselves comfortable, and I was actually pretty excited to get away. We got there and set up an impromptu campsite on a flat piece of ground where we would be sheltered from wind during the night. And we started this massive hike, and I was excited and nervous. But my excitement turned to annoyance when we stumbled upon another couple hiking at the same place that we were. I say that I was annoyed, but I really wasn't. Everyone has the right to public places as we did, as I am just very anxious and a very socially awkward person. The couple came up to us and introduced themselves, and we were polite and sparked up a little conversation. The couple was actually quite charming, and the questions they asked us and the information they shared with us had both Roger and I pretty disarmed. They asked if we wanted to continue the hike together, and since it's such a long trip, we agreed and figured that we could just turn around if we no longer want company. As I said, the couple is as sweet as can be. They're super informative about the area, and I found them very easy to talk to, even though I usually am terrible at keeping conversation with new people. We've been going for about 45 minutes, and I started falling a little behind. The guy that I'll refer to as Matthew, I won't be sharing the names that they actually gave us, falls behind me and starts up a conversation. And this is where things start to get a little creepy. He starts mentioning my physique and asks what type of workouts I do, stating that his partner is trying to tighten her buns and stay fit. He put his hand on my arm and hand and said, "Look at that definition. You must devote a lot of time to arm days." And I pulled back, kind of in shock and also wanting to get the hell out of there. Now, 5 minutes ago, I found him charming and endearing, and now I feel like his eyes are all over me and I'm getting some very creepy vibes. I catch up to Roger and try and whisper the gist of it to him, and he lets me know that the girl has also started being really weird and made a comment about his package and made sure to say that she wasn't talking about the backpack. Thoroughly creeped out at this point, we decide to just head back and thank them for their great conversation. Thankfully, they wanted to finish the hike and we could just get out of there and back to our campsite. After having a bite to eat, I realized both my bracelet and ring were gone. and I was racking my brain on how the hell I lost them. I never take them off, but it wasn't likely at all that they would just fall off. And then after 15 minutes of looking in my bags, I stopped dead in my tracks. I leaned over to Roger and said, "Matthew," touched my arm and hand on the hike when he was complimenting my definition. "Do you think he could have swiped it without me noticing?" And we weren't sure, and Roger told me that he would head back up in the morning and see if he saw anything on the ground. We went to bed early knowing that we were going to get up early and try to find the lost jewelry and head home. In the middle of the night, I awoke to the loud sound of a snapping branch and what felt like whispering or something. In that moment, I finally came to and shook Roger and woke him up and must have heard it as well. At that moment, he put a finger over his lips to tell me to keep quiet as he quietly unzipped the tent to take a look. The next thing I know, he's yelling, "Hey, what are you doing over there?" It was the couple from earlier. They said that they had stumbled across our area and wanted to wake up whoever was there because they saw a bear and were fearful that it might attack the site. Roger said that he appreciates that info, but that we're all set. And then Roger came back to the tent and put his finger over his mouth again. He kept his eyes directly on the window of the tent and didn't speak for about 5 minutes. He then looked at me and said, "Grab everything you can and get in the car." I went to speak, and he just repeated the same phrase. We got out and grabbed as much stuff as we could. He even grabbed the tent and began stuffing it still half together into the truck. And we just peeled off once we had the essentials and I finally got an answer out of him as to what was going on. He goes on to say that the Matthew, the guy from earlier, seemed to have a knife in his hand and another one holstered when he got out of that tent. And he said he didn't feel safe with us staying there and wanted to leave as soon as possible. Once we got home and began to shake that terrible nightmare from our minds, I decided to actually look up those couples' names on Facebook. Now, the only thing I could find was that those same 2 names were the names of the couple who died on a camping trip a few years prior. And no, this isn't some ghost story. There was a photo of the couple who had tragically passed, and they were not the 2 people that we saw. For what malicious reasons were they using these fake names, though? Was it just to steal people's stuff? Or something worse? I'm glad that we got up and left right away, or we may have found out what their true intentions were. College projects are supposed to be straightforward, right? You choose a topic, you do the research, put it all together, and maybe learn something along the way. When my friend Carlos and I signed up for a class, we thought it would be fun, a break from the usual grind. The assignment was simple: create a short documentary. But being the overachievers that we were, we decided to tackle something bigger, something that would set our project apart from the rest, and most importantly, something that was interesting to us. And that's how we ended up in the middle of this supposedly cursed forest, not far from where we live. Our goal was to debunk the local legends that had kept people out of those trees for decades. The forest was beautiful in its own way. It had tall, lush trees and a special kind of quiet that was almost therapeutic. But that silence had a weight to it. It was like the forest was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The stories about the forest go back generations, I've heard. Native American tribes used to live there, and the forest was supposedly sacred ground. You know, the same typical setup as every other cursed story in the United States. But then came the stories of ghosts, demons, and dark rituals. In my opinion, I believe it was just old folklore and myths that people said happened deep in those woods, and those myths got blown out of proportion and spread through the generations. Most people avoid the place, and those who didn't usually came back talking about negative energy and all that garbage. In case you can't tell yet, I'm not a believer in the paranormal or really energies or anything like that, and neither was Carlos. We didn't just buy that the woods were cursed. We thought it was all just superstitions and campfire stories, and that's why we thought that this was the perfect subject for a documentary, a chance to peel back the layers of folklore and show the world, or at least our class, but these woods were just another patch of trees. We spent the first few hours filming the scenery, capturing shots of the sunlight filtering through the trees, the dense foliage, and even some of the caves we found scattered throughout the area. It really was objectively a beautiful forest. There was one cave in particular that caught our attention. It wasn't deep, but the way the light played off the rocks made it perfect for the eerie vibe that we were going for in our film. As we set up the camera inside, it felt like something had changed. The sun started to shift behind the clouds, and it almost felt like the sounds of nature started to quiet down. Right at that moment, Carlos stopped, and freezing mid-shot, he whispered something in a very scared voice, asking if I heard that. I hadn't heard anything, but the look on his face was enough to make me feel somewhat uncomfortable. We stood there in the dim light of the cave, straining our ears. Then I heard it too. A sort of sound coming from outside. We had been hearing the wind blow all day, but this was definitely no wind. It was clearly the sound of someone or something approaching the cave. These footsteps would close in slowly, and then they just fade into the distance as if they were running away when they got close to the cave. We exchanged these very nervous glances at each other, and we spent the whole day laughing off the stories, but at that moment, I was not afraid to admit that I had felt a twinge of fear. My mind raced with a bunch of different scenarios. Maybe it was just another hiker or some animal passing by. But the longer we stood there, the more I started to doubt those rational explanations. Trying to keep a steady voice, I told him that we should wrap things up as we got enough footage. He didn't argue. We quickly packed up the camera and gear. We both tried to play it off as if though we were cool, but it was obvious we were both moving pretty frantically. As we stepped out of the cave, the forest seemed darker than it should have been, since the sun had started dipping in and out behind the clouds. The feeling of dread was overwhelming, and with every step we took back toward the car, the sense of dread grew. We hadn't gone far when the sound came again, this time louder and much closer. We stopped and tried to assess the sounds. We were listening as the rustling morphed into the unmistakable sound of footsteps. We turned, and that's when I saw them. Two dark figures moving swiftly through the trees, their shapes blurred by the shadows. And we both started to run. I turned back several times, and it was impossible to tell what was chasing us. I was refusing to believe that it was some dark entity, but I truly just couldn't tell in that moment as my heart was racing. Carlos and I were running awkwardly through the forest, trying not to run into trees or trip on the roots, and it seemed almost like these people were gliding through the trees. The faster we ran, the louder the footsteps grew, until it felt like they were right on top of us. I risked a final glance over my shoulder and got my clearest view of these people. Not only were they still chasing us, but they were closing in very fast. They were clearly human-shaped, but there was something just off about them, something in the way they moved. I couldn't make out any details other than that they were shaped like people. They clearly were dressed in all black, and they moved so effortlessly through the trees. Carlos could see that I was slowing down since I was looking back at these people, and he shouted for me to hurry up, and we made our final push to the car. We practically dove into the car, slamming the doors shut behind us, Carlos fumbling for his keys, his hand shaking, and when he finally turned that ignition on, the engine roared to life. And relief flooded through me until I looked down and saw the dashboard light up with some warning saying, "Tire pressure low." Carlos looked confused but didn't think too much about it. He just threw the car into gear, but the moment we tried to move, the vehicle lurched awkwardly. Our tires were flat, all of them. I stuck my head out the window and saw that the tires looked as if though they'd been slashed, and before we could fully process what was happening, movement caught my eye. I looked up and there they were. It was 3 people, not just 2, emerging from the tree line walking slowly towards us. My stomach dropped as I realized that they were the same blurred shapes that I was seeing before, and these weren't some ghostly apparitions, but actual humans, dressed in solid black from head to toe, their faces hidden behind featureless masks. And these masks looked very similar to ski masks, maybe a shiesty if you're familiar with those. complete black though. The car was locked, but that did little to calm the rising panic inside me as they drew closer. Carlos frantically tried to dial for help, but the signal was very weak, and the call continued failing to connect. Finally, Carlos got through to someone. He was screaming for help, giving his location, and then we lost the call again as it dropped. I could see the figures now more clearly than ever. One of them had a more slender build and smaller hands that had glittering nail polish, a detail that should have been insignificant but somehow made the situation even more strange. I almost wish that it was some dark entity instead of a person. One of the people started to bang on the window while the other two started to kick the doors and bang on the hood. Their fists continued to slam against the doors, rattling the car with every shot. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to think and come up with some kind of plan, but the situation was paralyzing. One of them, the smaller one with that nail polish, started pounding harder on the window, the glass beginning to crack with the force. I could hear them laughing, which was just more of a reminder of how horrible this situation truly was. The glass felt like it was going to give. I knew it, and there was nothing we could do. But then, through all this chaos, we saw lights appear. Sirens in the rearview mirror were a welcoming sight for once in my lifetime. These masked figures froze. Their laughter stopped as they turned to look, and as the vehicle was approaching, I was able to make out that it was a park ranger. And without a word, these people bolted back into the woods, disappearing as quickly as they appeared. The ranger pulled up beside us, his face sort of a mixture of concern and confusion as he got out of the car and approached us. He asked if we were okay, and we nodded, still too rattled to speak. The ranger led us to his vehicle, his radio crackling into life as he called for backup, and we left the car behind, the relief of being away from those woods almost indescribable. Now back at that station, a bunch of cops showed up and we gave our statements, detailing everything that had happened. While we were still there, the police finally caught up with one of those people. It turned out to be a large dude with a goatee and a tattoo of a rose on each side of his temple, the stems curling down his cheek and down his neck. Perhaps the worst part of the story is when the officers asked him during questioning why he was doing what he was doing, and apparently he just smiled and said, "Because I could, and I wanted to." His voice contained no remorse or empathy, and he seemed almost happy about it from what they were saying. We never found out who the other two weirdos were, never found out if they were part of some gang or just a bunch of sickos, and honestly I'm not sure I want to. The thought of them still out there just lurking in those woods waiting for their next victims is enough to keep me awake at night. After all of this, Carlos and I proved that the woods are not haunted, but that doesn't mean that monsters don't inhabit them. A few years ago, I spent that summer working as a lifeguard at a resort nestled deep in the mountains. The place wasn't exactly a tourist hotspot, but it had a steady stream of visitors. A lot of people were just looking to get away from the noise of city life, hike a few trails, and soak in the peace and quiet of the mountain area. The resort was spread out, with a main hotel, some cabins scattered around the property, and a pool that, on most days, was more about lounging than swimming. A few years ago, I was working on a lazy afternoon, the kind where the sun hangs high, and the most exciting thing to do is sip on an ice-cold drink while you drift in and out of a half nap. I was on lifeguard duty at the pool, making sure no one did anything stupid. The usual crowd was there. It was mostly married couples and young adults celebrating events, specifically a bachelorette party. But then, I noticed a guy hanging around the fence that separated the pool area from the rest of the resort. He was dressed for swimming, and he was just standing there, watching that group of young women celebrating that bachelorette party. The women were sunbathing and standing around the shallow end of the pool. At first, I really didn't think much of it. People get curious, and it wasn't uncommon for someone to come over and ask about pool hours or how to get a guest pass. But this guy wasn't asking questions. He just stood there, watching the women, and he started talking to them, but they seemed to be doing their best to ignore him. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but I could tell from the way that they were avoiding eye contact and shifting uncomfortably that they weren't interested in whatever he was saying. After a few minutes of this, I decided to step in. I walked over to the edge of the pool, trying to keep things casual, and I just called out in this sort of calm voice, asking him if he had a pool key. And the guy turned to look at me, and his face was just sort of expressionless. For a moment, I thought he was going to argue with me, but instead, he just shrugged and mumbled something under his breath before walking away. The women gave me these sort of relieved smiles, and one of them, this brunette with one of the most beautiful smiles I've ever seen, actually waved me over. And she seemed really chipper, and in a very sincere voice, she said, "Thank you for that. He was really starting to creep us out." I was trying to keep it cool and be confident, so I told him it was no problem. I was just doing my job. I felt like an idiot saying that, like I'm some sort of Captain America type superhero. But thankfully, they didn't think that I sounded dumb because right after that, they actually introduced themselves. The woman talking called herself Abby and then pointed to the rest of the girls. And there was Rachel, Claire, Danny, and Bree. I remember all of them, and they were celebrating Bree's bachelorette party. And we chatted for a bit. They were staying in one of the cabins for the weekend, and as it turned out, they were planning a little get-together that night. And they invited me to join them, and being a single guy with not much else to do, I figured, why not? And later that evening, I headed over to their cabin. The sun was setting and the temperature was drastically cooling down. The cabin was cozy with a small porch and view that overlooked the woods. Inside, the girls had set up drinks and snacks, and music was playing softly in the background. It was just the six of us, and the vibe was relaxing and very easygoing. I guess they did invite a few more guys that they had met early in the afternoon, but I was the only one who actually showed up. Now, we talked a bit and laughed, and after a couple of drinks, some of the girls started to get a bit adventurous. Bree, the one friend, suggested a night hike. I wasn't really thrilled about that idea, but I didn't want to be a killjoy, so I just went along with it. Not because I was scared, but because I worked there. I know what kind of animals lurk in those woods at night, and I'm not a huge fan. But we grabbed some flashlights and headed out into the woods, sticking to a trail that looped around the resort. As we walked, the usual nighttime sounds surrounded us. There were loud crickets, the occasional rustling of leaves, typical forest sounds. But after a while, I started hearing something else too. It was quiet at first, like someone was walking at a distance behind us, but every time I turned around, I saw nothing but darkness. Eventually, Abby looked visibly scared, and very nervously she asked if we had heard anything. Then we all stopped, listening intently, and there it was again. It was like erratic and rapid movements somewhere nearby in the darkness. This wasn't just the typical sounds of wind blowing through the trees, but something that sounded more deliberate. We all looked at each other, and that's when Rachel said that she had had enough. She and Bree decided to head back to the cabin, and I didn't blame them. The rest of us followed, keeping the pace quick, and by the time we made it back, the mood had shifted. The fun, carefree energy from earlier was gone, and it was replaced by a very nervous tension. We locked the doors and tried to shake off the feeling of being watched, but it was not easy. We sat around for a while trying to just laugh it all off, but there was just something different about the entire evening. At least speaking for myself, I couldn't shake that feeling of someone or something out in the woods with us. And in a moment of monumental stupidity, Danny and Bree decided to go back outside. Several minutes later, we heard footsteps outside the cabin. We turned down the music and started to intently listen. It sounded like soft footsteps circling the place. Each step was very slow. We could hear the wood creak with each step, and it didn't sound like footsteps of Danny and Bree. These were heavy and methodical footsteps. Rachel, who had been the most rattled by the hike, froze in that moment and asked, "Did you guys lock the back door?" I shot up from my seat and ran towards the back door. I was so scared, but I was trying to appear braver than I felt. I grabbed a flashlight for some reason and headed to that back door, checking the lock. It was secure, but I just knew someone was out there. I could only see a little bit outside that door window, and it was completely possible that someone was standing just outside my view. As I turned back toward the group, I heard a loud crash from the front of the cabin. Before I could react, Danny and Bree came barreling into the living room screaming that someone had been chasing them in the woods. I moved toward the door, hoping to calm them down. I was standing in the doorway, and before I closed the door, I looked out to the front of the cabin, and that's where I saw him. This guy was running straight at me, a hood pulled over his face. He takes me to the ground in a moment, and I felt the air rush out of my lungs as he knocked me to the floor. He was strong, stronger than I'd expected, and he was reaching for something from his waistband. I couldn't tell what it was, but I assumed reaching back there for something wasn't good for me. All I knew was that I had to fight back, but I was struggling to get him off of me. And just as I thought I was done, I heard a loud thud, and the weight on top of me had just shifted. Looking up, I see Abby standing over the both of us, holding a golf club, and her face was pale but determined. She hit him hard on the side of the head, and he was completely out cold. Instantly, we called the police, who surprisingly showed up quickly given the resort's pretty remote location. As it turns out, this guy was the new maintenance man, someone who'd started working at the resort just a few days earlier. You see, he'd been using his position to scope out the place, and God knows what he had planned for that night. Obviously, we pressed charges, and he was arrested on the spot. If that girl didn't act quickly, I may not be sitting here writing this. With all that going down, it still blows my mind that some people out there in the world are just that evil. This man appeared to have no other motives than just bringing harm to me and those girls. It was the last week before I had to head back to college, and my friends Jess and Katie decided that we needed one more adventure before the summer officially ended. We planned a light hike through the woods and an overnight campout, but nothing too intense, no pun intended for those who just got my intense joke. Anyways, we just wanted enough of a getaway to feel like we'd done something for our summer besides working and binge-watching Netflix. And the day started out exactly how we hoped. We packed up the car with our gear, grabbed some snacks, and hit the road with music blasting and the windows down. I think we played Wrecking Ball by Miley Cyrus at least 7 times. And the hike we chose was about an hour away, in a spot Jesse's older brother had told us about. It's pretty secluded, he said, but it's beautiful, and you'll practically have the place to yourselves. And that sounded perfect to us. On the way, we decided it wouldn't be a real camping trip without some beers, so we pulled into a gas station to try our luck. Now, none of us were 21 yet, but Katie, with her usual confidence, strode into the store to give it a shot. Jess and I waited in the car, laughing and chatting, but when Katie came back out empty-handed and shaking her head, we knew that it was a no-go. In an annoyed voice, she said, "The stupid guy wouldn't even entertain the idea." And Katie sighed as she slid back into the driver's seat. I could tell that she was slightly embarrassed. Katie wasn't used to hearing no, I guess. And just as we were about to give up on the beer idea, a guy who had been filling up his tank walked over to our car. And he looked normal enough. He was of average height and a little scruffy, maybe in his mid-20s. He was wearing this nice purple flannel that didn't look ragged or gross. Most noticeable, though, was that he had this friendly smile, but something about the way he was so quick to approach us set off a tiny alarm bell in my head. In a deep and almost bellowing voice, he says, "Hey," and then he started leaning down to Jess's window. "Saw you had some trouble in there. Need help getting something?" His tone seemed casual, but his eyes were all over each of us, lingering just a bit too long for comfort. Katie, always the bold one, jumped at the chance. Yeah, could you grab us some beers? We've got cash." She handed him a 20 and he nodded, smiling. "Sure thing. What do you want?" Still, something about his handsome smile was just off to me. Katie continued talking to him, and I tried silently communicating my unease with Jesse and Katie, but it was just too late now. The guy was already walking into the store. When he came back out, he had a case of beer in one hand and the change in the other. "Here you go," he said, handing it all over with that same smile. But then he hesitated like he was waiting for something. "Thanks, man," Katie said quickly, grabbing the beer and giving him a sort of little wave, and Jess started the car, and before the guy could say anything else, we drove off. As we pulled out of the parking lot, I glanced back and saw that he was just still standing there, seemingly watching us. That was weird," I muttered, but Katie brushed it off by saying something like, "Oh, relax, he's just being nice. We got our beer, didn't we?" And the drive to the trailhead was uneventful, and soon we were out in the woods, surrounded by tall trees and the sound of birds. The hike was gorgeous, just like Jess's brother had said. The path wound through the trees with sunlight flittering through the leaves, and we were laughing, taking pictures, and enjoying the peace that came with being away from civilization. But as the day wore on, I started to feel a little uneasy. Every now and then I thought that I heard something. Simple things, like a twig snapping, the leaves rustling, or the sound of a sudden shifting in the distance. But whenever I turned around, there was nothing there. I told myself it was just the usual sounds of the forest because, honestly, they were. No matter what I told myself, I just couldn't shake a certain feeling. And by the time we set up camp, the sun was finally setting and our little corner of the forest started to get dark very fast. We built a small fire, roasted some marshmallows, and cracked open a few of those beers that we almost didn't end up with. Jess and Katie were having a blast, and on the surface, I appeared to be having a blast as well as I continued trying to ignore the creepy darkness around us. While we were sitting around the campfire, it was Jess who first mentioned the sounds out loud. "Do you guys hear that?" she asked in a low voice, almost a whisper. "It sounds like, I don't know, like someone walking around out there." Katie was quick with a response saying, "Come on, it's probably just animals." But even she didn't sound entirely convinced. We all sat there, listening intently, but after a while, the noise stopped, and we tried to shake off the uncomfortable vibe that was surrounding the fire now. Eventually, we crawled into the tent, snuggled into our sleeping bags, and tried to get some sleep. But sleep didn't come easily. The sounds outside started up again. It was faint, but at least to me, the sounds appeared unmistakable. All those twigs snapping and the leaves rustling sounded a lot like bipedal footsteps. And my heart was pounding, and I could tell by the way Jess and Katie were shifting in their bags that they clearly were awake and hearing it too. After what felt like hours of just lying there, eyes wide open in the dark, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. The fire had died down before we got into the tent, and I wanted to make sure that it was completely out by now. I whispered to the girls that I was stepping outside for a minute, and they seemed to agree silently. I unzipped the tent and stepped out into the cool night. The woods were pitch black except for a little glow of the embers from our fire. I grabbed a bottle of water and was about to pour it over the coals when I heard those rustling sounds again, except this time it sounded like footsteps, and it sounded like it was directly behind me. I froze, and I remember being unable to catch my breath. Slowly I turned, and there, standing just a few feet away, was what I could only describe instantly as recognizing the guy from the gas station. His face was barely visible in the dim light, but in that instant my mind knew that was him. I recognized the purple flannel from earlier, and I wanted to scream and run, but I was rooted to the spot. I was so scared that it felt like I had forgotten how to breathe. The guy just stood there, staring at me, not moving a muscle, which somehow made this entire interaction even worse. It felt like an eternity, but finally, I found my voice. "Get away from me!" I screamed, and the sound seemed to snap him out of whatever trance he was in. He took a step back, and then another, and before I knew it, this guy was sprinting off into the woods. I didn't wait to see where he went. I ran back to the tent. Jess and Katie were rolling around as they heard me scream. I started to shake them and yelled, "We need to go now!" And I could feel my voice shaking. My friends didn't really question what was happening. I started saying about how the guy from earlier was outside the tent, and apparently that was enough to get my friends panicking and packing. And we packed up all in record time, not even bothering to fold the tent properly. We just stuffed everything into our bags and took off down the trail. I remember the trail back being so nerve-wracking because we could barely see anything. It was dark and our flashlights didn't do much to illuminate the path other than the trees that were directly in front of us, and every sound we heard made us erratic and just caused us to run faster. We got to the car, and it still wasn't even dawn yet. We didn't say much on the drive home, as all of us were just still too freaked out to process what had just happened. And in hindsight, we should have just called the police right then and there. But getting away was the only thing on our minds at that time. When we finally pulled into Jess's driveway, we just sat there for a moment, staring straight ahead. And that's when I finally called the police and reported what had happened. I told them about the guy from the gas station, and I told them about the approximate time that we had encountered him. I remember Katie begging me to get off the phone with the police because she was scared that she was going to get in trouble for the alcohol. But if this guy was some sort of creep, I wanted to make sure the cops knew. Now, it's been years now, and we never did figure out what that guy wanted, or if it even truly was him from that place following us. And after that night, we decided our summer adventures were over. I can still imagine the sight of him standing there in the dark, staring at me, and I often wonder what would have happened if I hadn't gone out to check the fire. Not that it's the most reassuring thought, but I also hope that this man was just a peeping creep, and not something way, way worse.